Prologue. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Tick-tock, tick-tock. Inside an empty kitchen, Jo Min-jun quietly stared at the clock. Don't go. Stop. Despite his silent scream, the clock hand continued to move diligently, like it always does. 11:50.9 and 50.7 seconds. 58 seconds. 59 seconds. And 12 o'clock. It was New Year's Eve. And he was at the end of his 20s, as well as the beginning of his 30s. Jo Min-jun sighed deeply as sudden fatigue enveloped him. Time was moving slowly, and he thought to himself, compared to the amount of time spent, he did not gain anything. Jo Min-jun was a high school teacher. Precisely speaking, an English teacher. Like all teaching jobs, it wasn't that successful of a career, but neither was a failure. Right. At least, it was like that until spring of his 28th year. But in March, Jo Min-jun resigned from his teaching position. He knew that teaching wasn't meant for him. He didn't even think of becoming a teacher once. What Jo Min-jun aspired to be ever since he was young was to become a chef. However, he couldn't go against parents' will. At that time, Jo Min-jun had a decent grade, and he had already been accepted to a college through early decision. So, when he said he wanted to become a chef, what kind of parents would support that kind of rash decision? 10 years passed after that. Jo Min-jun followed his parents' wishes, and was able to find his place at a high school. However, that was it. His parent kept saying that he will thank them one day, but that was not it. Yes, the job was stable, but Jo Min-jun only felt vanity from his job. So in the end, he resigned. After that, he started to work in a restaurant. He found a job as a dishwasher in a famous restaurant in Gangnam. He washed dishes for half a year, and after 1 year, he started making salads and other sloppy side dishes. That was all he had accomplished in his 30 years of life. Someone who had nowhere to go in New Year's Day, sitting as time went by in a dark empty kitchen. There was no point complaining about it now. Because tea was a choice he had made. So, he had no right to complain about his current frustrating life. Then, suddenly the sound of chime rang, and the lights lit up in the restaurant. Oh, Min-jun Hyung. You were still here. It was Park Yuseok. He was 2 years younger than him, but he was his superior. He was lined up to become the head chef in a few years. Ah, yes. Sunbae. What brings you here? Sunbae equals equivalent to the Japanese senpai. Designates a senior in work or study. Jo Min-jun was using honorifics to speak to him. He had no choice. It was because the hierarchy of the cooking world was very strong. Park Yuseok pretended like he was uncomfortable at the honorifics, but secretly he enjoyed it. Park Yuseok took out a wallet from a corner of the kitchen, and then shook it in front of Jo Min-jun. Ah, what a relief, I think I left something somewhere. Hyung. Peel those garlic while I go get it. Seemed like we were out of garlics. Since you are here already, it would be better to peel them now rather than doing it tomorrow morning, no. I'm a little tired right now. Ha, Hyung. Please help me keep my good manners towards elders. Other hubbies never talk back to me when I ask them to do these little chores. Hubby equals equivalent to the Japanese kuhai, designates a junior in work or study, understood. I'll be leaving now. Take care. Park Yuseok left after that. But he picked up what Park Yuseok's mumbling before he left. Does he think he's all that because he's older? So fucking scary. Jo Min-jun couldn't do anything but stared at the back of Park Yuseok. Even though he was mad, he couldn't say anything. If he did, he would become known as reckless, and someone who disregards the hierarchy. He had no choice to swallow his anger. Garlic my ass. But still Jo Min-jun was taking the garlics out of the kitchen refrigerator. After peeling garlics for a while, Jo Min-jun turned on his smartphone. And he went into his blog. His blog was the only thing that soothed him these days. There were posts about dishes that he made, and the comments that gets posted on those. When he read those, it gave him peace of mind. Jo Min Jun clicked on the Right Post button. The subject was simple. New Year's greetings. Even the content was simple and boring. There were no comment for about 10 minutes. Because Jo Min Jun wasn't a famous blogger or anything. When he was taking notes off of other blogs' cooking recipes, he received a comment notification. It was a familiar nickname. Cooking Guru. JoChef.nim Happy New Year, happy face, your New Year's greeting was the first. Asterisk nim equals honorific calling somebody higher, a customer, or as to be polite. Equivalent to the Japanese, sama, Jo Chef, was Jo Min Jun's nickname. Even though it was just one person, his sadness loosened up a little. Jo Min Jun quickly replied. Jo Chef. Happy New Year's to you too, CookingGuru.nim. Your greeting was also my first. Cooking Guru. There were no posts about dinner, don't tell me you didn't eat. Jo Chef. Somehow it ended up being like that. T__T for a while, the two exchanged surface-level conversation. It was after about 10 comments were exchanged, the conversation became deeper. Cooking Guru. Then JoChef.nim is still in his second year. Jo Chef. Yes, although I flaunt myself a little in my blog with my cooking, but I just peel garlic in some restaurant. LOL. Cooking Guru. Ah, it's a pity. If you changed your path just a little bit younger, I'm sure you would have been in a better situation. Jo Chef. What can I do? It's my fault. I didn't have the courage back then. I realized it too late, that everyone has their own path. Cooking Guru. If you could return to when you were younger, would you jump into the world of cooking right away? Jo Chef. Yes, I would. Now I am certain which path is my path. Of course it's pretty rough right now, but still. After that comment, there were no other comment for quite a while. Maybe he became tired of such a deep conversation. It was a bit depressing topic to talk about in New Year's. Jo Min Jun rested his head on a table outside, and closed his eyes. He was sleepy. Tired. He did not want to think about anything. It was after around 10 minutes after Jo Min Jun fell asleep. His dark phone screen illuminated brightly with a comment alarm. New Cooking Guru. Sure. Return to when you were younger. I would like to see your youthful pursuit of your path too. Note. Hyung. Big/older brother. Kind of an equivalent to the Japanese onii.san, but only used between male to male. Translator, Pumba TL Czech. Kabato-chan Desuki. Chapter 1. Back to 7 years ago, 1, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. Back to 7 years ago, 1, wake up. Minjun, Jo Min Jun. Jo Min Jun opened his eyes with a frown to the ringing of the loud voice. He was sure that he slept at the restaurant, so why was he home? While he was dazed and confused about his situation, Lee Hyson opened her mouth again. What are you blanking out for? Hurry and wake up. It's 10 already, 10, it's 10. Oh my God. Why didn't you wake me up earlier? What are you blabbering about? You're taking a break from school. What? There's no break at the restaurant. I have to go to work. Restaurant. You're funny. Did you have a dream about being a chef or something? Get a hold of yourself, Jo Min Jun. You are a college student. What? A dream about being a chef. She probably said that because I was working at the restaurant. But a college student. Jo Min Jun suddenly felt strange. Jo Min Jun looked around his house by reflex. The chair that broke 3 years ago was standing by the table, as nothing has happened. The TV that they threw because of bad quality was sitting there in the living room, like it was its place. Jo Minjun asked with a dazed voice. Mom, what year was it? What? What are you saying? Are you okay? Wake up already. What year is it? It's 2010. Hurry and wash up and come to eat. Food's going to get cold. 2010, then this was the year he was discharged from the army. Jo Minjun washed up sloppily, still lost and confused. At Lee Hyson's urging, he sat at the table. At that moment, something like a computer screen popped up in front of Jo Minjun: white rice, freshness. 73% origin. Go Ryung, South Korea quality. High cooking score. 5 out of 10. Ha! Jo Minjun rubbed his eyes, and stared at the rice blankly. What am I looking at? Did I go insane? Or am I still in a dream? He could only think of such things. But the screen did not disappear even after he closed his eyes. In confusion, Jo Minjun turned and stared at a doenjang jjigae. This time too, the screen popped up. Doenjang jjigae, freshness. 90% origin. Hidden. It contains too many ingredients, quality. Medium, ingredient average, cooking score, 4 out of 10. Did I read too much fantasy novels these days? What? Are you reading things like those instead of studying these days? No. Mom. That's not what I'm saying. Don't you know how hard your dad works? Use your time wisely for your dad and mom. So much nagging for reading some novel. It's something that he hadn't experienced much after graduating college. But he missed those nagging sometimes. Did I return to 7 years ago? He remembered the conversation with Cooking Guru. He didn't want to believe it, but given this ridiculous situation, he was only able to come up with one conclusion. So he sent me back to the past. When he thought about that conclusion, the reason behind followed. The Cooking Guru asked if he were to return to his younger days, would he jump into the world of cooking without any hesitation? And to that Jo Minjun answered yes. He is that cooking is his path. Honestly, rather than being happy, he was more distraught and confused. But even if he kept thinking about it, there were nothing logical he can come up with. Jo Minjun lifted his spoon and brought some of the doenjang jjigae up to his mouth. It was at that moment another screen popped up. You have mastered Lee Hyson's doenjang jjigae recipe. Mix strong doenjang with regular doenjang at 2.1 ratio, then add water 3 times the amount of doenjang. Add the potato first and boil until water level goes down a bit, then add half of onion, and 1 block of tofu. And then, add 1 teaspoon of dry anchovy seasoning, basically MSG, stir and boil until the stew is done. She said she doesn't put in MSG. Now more than the mysterious screen that pops up, those little details caught his attentions. He said you wouldn't be able to get this flavor without adding MSG multiple times. His mom always denied such usage. As he was giving Lee Hyson, of course it was look, she clicked her tongue at him. Note. Korean parents do this a lot when their kid does something bad. Why are you not eating? Are you already complaining about the food? Here I thought that you'd get better after serving in the army. When she said that, a terrible thought came up. If he returned even a bit earlier. To when he was 21, 22, when he was still serving in the army. Thank you so much, Cooking Guru. What I said about cooking, I will make them come true. The lunch time was ending. Maybe it was because he ate around 10, he was not really hungry. So, he was able to go deeper into his thoughts. He was 30 years old. He was a high school English teacher, and aspired to become a chef. And now he was 23 years old. He was a college student, and he was preparing to return to school. What should I do? The moment he returned to the past, his mind was already set. This was his final chance. He didn't want to hesitate this time and jump into the world of cooking late. But his parents would not allow him to quit school and pursue a life of a chef blindly. First he had to show his parents what he could do. Jo Min-jun went out into the living room. Lee Hysun was folding laundry while she was watching TV. Jo Min-jun spoke up. "Mom, do you want me to make you a simple snack? You're gonna cook. I made you food before. There's something I've been practicing. Alright, let's see how good my son's cooking is." As soon as she said that, Jo Min-jun headed straight to the refrigerator. Although Lee Hysun didn't really enjoy cooking, she still had 3 fridges, one being a special fridge for kimchis. Because of that, there were a lot of ingredients that's been sitting in the fridge for a long time. His father, Jo Suyup, always complained about Lee Hysun letting all those food going to waste. Let's see: large egg, freshness. 85% origin. Namyang, South Korea quality. Medium. These screens that pop up suddenly without notice sometimes confounded him. First, Jo Min-jun put the egg in the bowl. And then he grabbed lemon, sugar, and starch. There was a dish that popped into his head when he saw the egg. It was a dish that was pretty simple, but still needed quite a bit of work. Souffle. A bread that looked like a muffin, but softer than custard. The quality of souffle depended heavily on the skill of the chef. So much that, there is a saying that all the other food at a restaurant that make good souffle are all good. There was a phase when he was really into souffle. If he didn't eat souffle for dessert after all 3 meals a day, he thought he was going to die. Of course, after making souffle like there was no tomorrow, he got tired of it. But still, it's something that he made at least once a week. He was confident. First Jo Min-jun preheated the oven, and separate the egg whites into a bowl. It was egg whites from total 2 eggs. Then, he added a large spoonful of sugar, and mixed well. Next was simple, whipping it like his life depended on it. The sound coming from the kitchen intrigued Lee Hysun. She raised her voice and asked. "What's making so much noise?" "I'm making bread." "You can make something like that. Just wait. It'll be good." Jo Min-jun kept turning his arm. "If you keep whipping egg whites, bubble form. If you whip more and those bubble harden into actual cream, that was meringue." What's so hard about whipping some egg, one might ask, but making meringue took quite a toll on the arm muscles. It's something you had to spin with an right arm, and then the left arm when the arm gets tired. Of course, you can only spin in one direction. If you spun it the other way, the bubbles you worked so hard to make would disappear. It took him almost 4 minutes just to make the meringue. Jo Min-jun took a deep breath and looked at the meringue. Meringue, freshness. 85% origin. Hidden. Too many ingredients, quality. Medium, ingredient average, cooking score. 5 out of 10. He put much effort into making it, but the cooking score was only 5 out of 10. But he understood why. He added sugar right from the beginning, instead of mixing it in during the middle. It's not the standard way of making it. Jo Min-jun licked his lips, and cut the lemon into half. Then he filtered the lemon juice through the sieve, then stirred it into the meringue. Slowly the color of the meringue changed to light yellow, and it started giving off the fresh sour scent. At this point, the dish was halfway done. Jo Min-jun rubbed butter and sugar on a mug, and carefully poured the prepared meringue into it. He thought that 2 mugs would have been enough, but there was little bit more, which he put into a coffee cup. The next step was simple. Jo Min-jun put the mugs on the cookie tray, and put them in the preheated oven. The next step was simple. Put sugar and starch into a mixer, and create sugar powder. After a while, when he heard the oven beep, Jo Min-jun took out the souffle, and sprinkled the sugar powder filtered over strainer. That was the end. Light lemon-colored souffle, with white sugar powder resting on it, like snowflakes. Jo Min-jun looked at the screen that popped up on top of the souffle. Lemon souffle, freshness. 98% origin. Hidden. Contains multiple ingredients, quality. Medium, ingredient average, cooking score. 6/10 points. Jo Min-jun prepared his dancing taste buds, and ate a spoonful of souffle in the smallest cup. It was soft, but still had a rough texture like scrambled eggs. It was soft like fresh snow smushing under a shoe, which added stimulation to his tongue. The flavor was the best part as always. Mixture of sour and sweet flavor, was one of his favorite flavors. Jo Min-jun opened his mouth. Mom, it's done. Okay. Bring it here. Alright. No sincerity even though he put in so much effort. Jo Min-jun brought the souffle to her. He was confident that she will be surprised after a single bite. And his expectation did not go wrong. Lee Hai-sun's eyes popped open wide, and looked back and forth at the souffle and Jo Min-jun. You made this. Then you think a snail bride made it or what? Asterisk note. Snail bride. She comes out of one of Korean folk tales, where a snail turns into a woman, and becomes a bride of a good-hearted farmer, who saved her. Lee Hai-sun picked up a spoon as she said that. And after poking the lemon souffle, she let out a gasp. Wow! It's so soft. And then one bite. That was the finale. Lee Hai-sun chewed the souffle, and took another bite quickly. And then stared at Jo Min-jun in awe. Hey, do you take cooking classes in secret? Jo Min-jun smirked without saying anything. It was at that moment. Lee Hai-sun is amazed by your lemon souffle. The EXP rises rapidly due to the cooking skill that exceeds the current level. Baking level increased. Cooking level increased. Note. All Korean male citizens are required to serve around 22 months in the army depending on their MOS, basically Marines do less with 18 while infantries do 22. It's something every guy has to do, and something not a lot of guy looks forward to. Translator, Pumba TL Check. Kabato Chandesuki. Chapter 2. Back to 7 years ago, 2, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Back to 7 years ago, 2, status window, Jo Min-jun, cooking level. 5 baking level. For tasting level 0.6 decoration level 0.4 he had some thoughts about his situation, but he never imagined that he'd see something like this. It was as if his life became a cooking game. He stared at the screen with an indescribable and confused feeling for a while, then turned his head towards Lee Hai-sun. And he opened his mouth. Status window. Lee Hai-sun, cooking level 0.3 baking level 0.0 tasting level 0.4 decoration level 0.2 those were pretty sad stats. But, Jo Min-jun remembered that almost all of Lee Hai-sun's cooking did not taste that great. If her skills were that low, that explained why. Skill window. He mumbled to see if it would pop up, and the more detailed screen indeed opened up. Knife skill, heat controlling skill, understanding of traditional Korean cuisine, etc. But of those many skills, 2 particularly caught Jo Min-jun's attention. Understanding of Italian cuisine. Mastery 23% when preparing pasta, pizza, dolce soup, and other Italian dishes. His understanding of cooking would increase. When preparing Italian dishes, probability of failure decreased. Although the chances were low, it was possible to make a dish that was above the current cooking level. The chef's experimental attitude. Chef's experimental attitude is added to the recipe when trying new dishes. When attempting a new dish, low chances of unlocking new recipes. He didn't complain about his mastery of Italian cuisine. It seemed that whenever he studied or made Italian dishes, his proficiency would rise, and he wasn't quite sure yet, but there seemed to be a system that compensated for his dish. He also understood why he didn't have mastery in the chef's experimental attitude. That is for one's attitude, and it would be weirder if someone could master an attitude. But the description was a bit vague. Low chance of unlocking a new recipe. Does that mean that it opens up like the status and skill window? Or does it mean that it pops up in his head? And the word new dish was vague also. Does it mean completely new dish that no one has thought of before, or a dish that Jo Min-jun has never made before? I'll find out when I try. Jo Min-jun smiled. He was only a 30-year-old newbie chef with practically no experience. 23-year-old. It wasn't very young, but it wasn't too late to challenge the road of cooking. Even 30 wasn't even too late. He was just in a rush, that was all. But the first obstacle he would face was his parents. His career as a teacher was set after his graduation, so it would be difficult to get their permission. Jo Min-jun thought carefully and came up with a plan. The first step was to show his parents that his cooking skills were pretty good. That moment what he thought of was a TV program's name. Grand Chef Korea. He liked it so much to the point he didn't miss a single season. If he were to participate in that program, although he wouldn't be able to win, if at least he could get a good grade his parents would still recognize him to a degree. However, was that program still running? It started broadcasting on England and the United States and then came to Korea. Jo Min-jun unlocked his cell phone and searched for Grand Chef. Of course, there were no news in Korea. Maybe they would make a contract at the end of this year and start broadcasting the next one. That program won't do. Jo Min-jun let out a sigh and continued to search. He searched for cooking competitions in Korea but there were no properly organized ones. Even if he were to participate in a competition it wasn't sure he would be the one to win. The strength he had now wasn't an absolute one. Eventually he would have to polish his cooking skills. The results of searching for hours on the internet, the conclusion Jo Min-jun came to was to participate in an international tournament. He didn't have confidence in winning, but he did have confidence in reaching the finals. Because it wasn't that he did not have that much ability to walk the chef path. Maybe if his parents had a more positive view on cooking, but they only viewed it as a 3D occupation. It wasn't the moment where cooking mania blew everywhere, so to change that, Jo Min-jun had to show them that he had the capability to cook. And Jo Min-jun believed that to change that was to get a good grade at the competition. However, there were no worthy competitions in Korea he could participate in. The ones that had some degree of recognition were all Korean-based food themes, and there were also team-based competitions. So he didn't have any option but to look for international ones. So the only option he had left was one. Grand Chef. Not Grand Chef Korea, but only Grand Chef. The Grand Chef that opens in the United States. Maybe it would be better to refer to it as a program rather than a competition. The important thing is that Grand Chef is a competition for amateurs. And there was no other competition for amateurs that attracted as much as Grand Chef. Not only in the US, Australia was also getting application forms, but to Jo Min-jun, the United States was more eye-catching. If he had the same conditions he thought that instead of going to Australia it would be better to go to the United States. He didn't have any problem talking in English. At one point he was also an English teacher. If he couldn't hold a conversation, wouldn't that be embarrassing? There is only one problem. Parents. If it were travel fees, he had some savings before going to serve in the army. However, if he were to tell his parents that he was going to the US to participate in a cooking competition, it was obvious they were going to refuse. Was it that he had to tell them that it was only traveling? He was starting to get upset. Before reincarnating, when he resigned as a high school teacher, his parents were so angry they wanted to refrain him from doing so. However, they couldn't stop his stubbornness. He only left them a scar, so he didn't want that to happen in this life. Can't be done. I have to hide it from them. That was the most peaceful road. While thinking about those things, he was searching on the internet plane tickets to the United States. He heard someone pressing the password at the entrance of his house. Note: most of Korean houses come with electronic keys. Jo Min-jun turned off the screen and went to the living room. He thought it would be his father, but the one who came in was his younger sister Jo Era. Her school uniform revealed her skinny dark-tanned body. "Mom, I'm home." Oh, Appa was home too. He felt a surge of mixed emotions looking at her sister wearing her uniform. It was proof he time-traveled to the past. Lee Hyezian walked towards Jo Era and said, "Hey Era, come here and try this. Your Appa made it." "Ha! This." Lee Hyezian gave Jo Era the souffle. She begged her son to make some more. Jo Era uneasily held her spoon and gave it a bite. She yelled with her eyes round. "Delicious. It can't be. How could Appa make something like this?" "Right. I was also surprised after tasting it, Appa, be honest. It's some of those instantaneous food, right?" Jo Min-jun, instead of replying, chewed his tongue and said to his mom, "Mom. If you are tired, maybe I should prepare dinner. You are going to make dinner?" Lee Hyezian looked at Jo Min-jun as if things like this could happen. And right now, it looked like Jo Min-jun was having fun cooking and tried this and that, but it didn't look like he was ready to prepare for dinner. But he did not only cook, it also tasted great, so she couldn't help but to find it to be unexpected. However, she couldn't refuse if he was volunteering to prepare the bothersome dinner for her, so she nodded and said, "Okay. Try preparing dinner. Let's try some of my son's cooking. Is that okay, Mom? Can you trust Appa's cooking skills? This girl. Look at the bread you ate. It looks like your Appa has some aptitude in cooking." "That's right, but," Jo Era looked with uncertainty at Jo Min-jun. "Appa, do you really have confidence in cooking?" Jo Min-jun let out a grin and whispered to Jo Era, "Won't it be tastier than Mom's cooking?" Translator. Subak proofreader. Mailed. Chapter 3. Back to 7 years ago, 3, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Back to 7 years ago, 3, that's right. Jo Era just nodded without thinking it twice. Jo Min-jun couldn't help but finding it amusing. To think that their mother's cooking was rated so low by her children. However, even if you took it for granted that Lee Hyezian cooked well, Jo Min-jun was confident in surpassing her. Jo Min-jun was almost at the top of the amateurs. His cooking skills weren't ones to be inferior to an ordinary housewife. "Era. What do you want to eat? Choose something. I need to have options to choose." "Why, you know. You can choose from Western cooking, or soups. If not, you can also choose noodles." Jo Era started to think. From usually seeing her Appa that only stared at the ceiling to suddenly start acting like a chef. That was really amusing. So she thought of something that seemed the hardest to prepare. Suddenly a thought came to her head. That Chinese food was really hard to make. Jo Era let a malicious grin and said, "Champong. What? Make me some champong." "Champong. Why? Can't do it." Jo Min-jun found it outrageous. He could clearly see the intentions of Jo Era, so he didn't even get angry. Jo Min-jun said, "I'll make it." "What?" "That I'll make it." Jo Min-jun immediately went to the cutting board. He didn't particularly have Chinese noodles, but he thought that instead he could make some flat rice noodles. For seafood he had some clams, but he didn't have time to clean them. It was almost 6. And to properly clean the clams it took at least 3 hours. "Era. Go to the fridge over there and look if there's some pork meat." "Okay." Maybe she was sorry for asking him to make dinner, but Jo Era moved. However, Jo Min-jun asked her to. After looking for some time on the fridge, she came with a lump of pork meat. "Here. Chuck beef, freshness. 87% origin. Korea, Hengseong quality." "Hi, it's chuck beef." Personally, it was the part of the pork he liked the most. The taste of the lard compared to samgyeopsal, or moksal, neck meat, was really deep. The feeling you got when you chewed was also really different. Jo Minjun thought for a while. Can I make it to suit with the champong soup? He thought it was going to be okay. Only, if the meat was grounded. In case it was not grounded, the feeling the chuck beef gived would play differently with the noodles. Jo Minjun took a polished and sharp knife from the knife holder. And immediately started to cut the beef to ground it later. The part where Jo Minjun took more emphasis on while cooking was the use of the knife. Ordinary people might think that only making the shape of holding the knife was enough, but depending on how you dealt with the knife, the final result of the cooking would vary greatly. Even if the edge of the knife was less sharp, or if you failed to control your strength while slicing the meat, it could end up like a torn rag. But of course, if you dedicated and put your all to it, even a little kid could do it easily. Of course they wouldn't be as fast as Jo Minjun. Jo Era watched with eyes of admiration and said, "When did you improving your knife skills? Why are you making a fuss over only this?" Jo Minjun grinned. To say the truth, the time he improved the most on his knife skills was when he just entered a restaurant as the youngest. He didn't know how many onions and garlics he had to chop and slice. He thought that those days were quite painful, but thinking about it he thought that those moments were necessary. However, he didn't think of repeating those times. Ever. After slicing the meat, he also trimmed the green onions and the garlics he had by the side. After crushing the garlics with the side of the knife, he sliced it. As for the green onions, he sliced them longly. Jo Era was looking at this sight with her mouth wide open. He was already fast while slicing the meat, but now it surpassed that. The skill he showed while dealing with the green onions and the garlic wasn't normal. It could be said that it was something you could only watch in TV. Mom. Appa handles the knife really well. Okay. Jo Era raised her voice and yelled, but Lee Hai-sean replied as if it was annoying. Even if he was good at it, how good could he be? Jo Era was frustrated, but she didn't keep bothering Lee Hai-sean. Anyways, the slicing was nearly over. Jo Minjun spread the cooking oil on the wok. And when it was sufficiently hot, he put in the garlic and the green onions. When the wet vegetables met the fire, it made frying noises. The sound made him happier. Sometimes some of the oil got to him, but that was unavoidable. Besides the wok, he started to boil some water. Instead of pouring cold water on the already stir-fried ingredients, it was better to pour already hot water. The aroma the green onions and the garlic gave tickled his nose. When the garlic started to turn brownish, Jo Minjun put the chuck beef over it. The pork oil and the cooking oil mixed and got sucked by the ventilator. The chuck beef got roasted and turned yellowish. And that was the moment to put some pepper powder. Jo Minjun didn't waste a single minute and put on the pepper powder and the oyster sauce. It was the next moment after that. Jo Minjun grabbed a handful of dried cabbage leaves. Jo Era, that was observing next to him, said with a freaked expression, "Everything's okay, but is it alright to put that dried cabbage leaves? It isn't even potato soup. I think it should be okay." What's with that answer? He couldn't answer that it was going to be okay. It was something he hadn't tried yet. However, he thought that the aroma of the dried cabbage leaves was going to mix in well with the champong. It gave the feeling he was going to present a kind of Korean champong. He thought of putting in some coriander, but Jo Era didn't like coriander much. And if by chance he did put some coriander, it was going to get closer to Thailandese cooking. "Appa, give me that portion of meat please." Anyways. Jo Minjun smiled and gave Jo Era a spoonful of chuck beef. Jo Era, after tasting a bit, laughed. "I love meat." "Me too." Jo Minjun nodded and also heated a portion of chuck beef. You cook for tasting things like this. Instead of making champong, I think it's gonna be okay to eat it fried. It's because you only ate a bite. If you keep eating, it gets salty. If you say it like that. Maybe you are right. Even if you put in soup it was salty, then how salty would it be if you ate it alone? Jo Minjun checked the pot filled with water. The water was boiling. Jo Minjun lifted the pot and slowly poured the soup to the wok. It made a cha sound similar to the one when you put off fire. Soon the aroma of the green onion and the pepper powder spread. Unexpectedly, I think it is going to be delicious. Later, don't ask me to make you some. Jo Minjun put the boiling wok behind, took the onion and went to the cutting board. He sliced the tap, and sliced horizontally following the texture. Slicing one onion seemed to take at least 10 seconds. Jo Era couldn't help but feel confused and feel admiration. Appa, is it not that you study English in university but instead go to cooking school? It's a compliment, right? No. It's too sudden. That you cook well. My Appa. Like this. The confused feelings were transmitted by her voice. Jo Minjun didn't respond and smiled. Saying the truth, he thought it to be pointless to answer. Did he practice alone? What time would he have on a house that he lived with everyone? He could only change subjects. Enough. Bring me some cabbage. Jo Era, still confused, didn't reply but still obeyed. Jo Minjun followed the texture and sliced it perpendicularly. If it was too big, not only didn't go in the mouth but it also took a while to chew all the food. First he put the cabbage from 1 to 2 minutes. After that he also put the rice noodles. If you boiled the noodles with soup, the noodles would lose oxygen and get harder, but that could also help on strengthening the flavor. Personally, Jo Minjun preferred pouring the soup on the already cooked noodles. Because he liked simple flavors. But there was a reason he didn't do that right now. Bothersome. To put the soup and the noodles took 2 or 3 times the effort. And it was not that the difference in flavors was that different. It was only a matter of preferences. If that was the case, he didn't have any reason to trouble himself. Also, aside of it being too bothersome, rice noodles didn't mix well with soup. So he expected that boiling them at the same time would give it more flavor. Jo Minjun silently prevented the noodles from getting sticky and continued to boil. While he was doing that, before Jo Minjun appeared an alarm that wasn't as surprising as before. Chuck beef champong, freshness. 94% origin. Too many ingredients to find out quality. High cooking points. 5 out of 10 translator. Subak proofreader. Mailed. Chapter 4. Back to 7 years ago. 4. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Back to 7 years ago. 4. The cooking score was only 5. However, the 6 points lemon souffle was good enough to be sold. He thought that if he got a 5 it would be rather good to eat. He served the champong with both expectation and disappointment of the 5 points dish. Ah, Dad needs to be here too. It was Jo Era mumbling with disappointment. They said that if you talked about a tiger behind its back it would come, Korean tale. Similar to Speak of the Devil. The sound of the door opening could be heard as Jo Soo-yob came in. When that person came in, he smelled something and said. What's this smell? Did you order champong? No. Appa made it. Dad, come quickly. Jo Era brought Jo Soo-yob by the hand as if she was proud that her brother had made it. Jo Soo-yob let a laugh looking at the prepared champong. Jo Minjun made this. I just made it because I was bored. Jo Minjun talked like that and set the chopsticks. Jo Soo-yob sat on the chair with a puzzled expression. He didn't believe that the dish in front of him was made by Jo Minjun. Lee Hai-seon said while walking towards the table. Before, he also made some sort of cake. What was that? Souffle. Lemon souffle. Yeah, that. I had to leave some for you. But there was just too little. Later ask Jo Minjun for some. If you say it like that, then I'll get interested. Jo Minjun clasped his hands. Okay, for now eat. The noodles are going to get cold. Right. Let's. Jo Soo-yob closed his eyes and held his hands together. It was a Christian house, so it was normal to pray before eating. Jo Min-jun also held his hands and offered his prayer. Make it so it is surprisingly delicious. Of course, even if he tried his best, it was still a 5-point dish. However, the happiness of a chef was listening compliments of his dish being delicious. As if everyone accorded beforehand, they lifted their chopsticks almost at the same time and grabbed some noodles. An almost transparent flat rice noodle. At first glance it looked like it was linguine noodles. Champong pasta. At that moment's thought, Jo Min-jun let out a laugh. There was a moment here that unimaginable combination was really popular. When put in the mouth, the first thing felt was the spicy pepper oil flavor. And above that the salty and sweet flavor, and the special aroma the pork beef left. It was delicious. It was good to the point it could be comparable to a town's Chinese food store champong. When Jo Min-jun looked the expression of his family, he thought it would be the same for all of them. The chopsticks that held the noodles didn't seem to stop. Jo Soo-yob was even drinking all the soup. In the first place, there wasn't even a need to look around. Before Jo Min-jun, an alarm appeared. The clients that ate the chuck beef champong are satisfied. To call them clients. It came out of nowhere, but it still felt good to hear. Jo Min-jun laughed and said. It's delicious, right? No joke. I think there is going to be no need to call another Chinese food store. Even so, I think the flavor's a little different. There's no seafood, and it lacks of spiciness. To say the truth, to make it spicier wasn't a big problem. It was a generation where there existed sauces to make the hot flavor. There was no need to ignorantly make it hotter using fire. If you heated sugar with cooking oil, it was enough to give the hot flavor. It seemed like a fraud, but it was a useful solution. However, making champong took too much of your time. Compared to how hard it was to make it, instead of suffering at house, it was better to order it elsewhere. With that in mind, Jo Min-jun showed that he wasn't confident on purpose. Jo Soo-yob said. Is there any more? Dad ate it all. There is. Please wait. Jo Min-jun brought the wok and served the champong. Jo Soo-yob said while laughing. Can it be that he cooks better than you? Our Min-jun. Anyways. Didn't you say last time that my cooking was the best? Nah. Sincerely not. Your cooking is salty or flavorless. It's one or the other. There's no middle. Middle, Doviko. Jo Soo-yob laughed as if he was teasing her. Lee Hai-seon was angry, but she couldn't reply back. She didn't have a hobby on cooking, nor did she have talent. At the saying that she was a bad cooker, she didn't specially have something to say against that. Lee Hai-seon instead picked on Era. Era. Stop eating. You are going to get fat. What? Don't want to. In a little more I'm going to be a senior. Legally, it's the age where girls can get fat. But you don't even study. Stop eating. Do you know how fat champong makes you? Enough. I'm not even the type to get fat. Take care of yourself. Don't you know that you are getting fat? Jo Min-jun just sighed. The preliminaries are on March. Jo Min-jun just looked at the screen. It was the preliminaries test of Grand Chef. Anyways, he couldn't even apply for the first semester's inscription as the time he was discharged from military services overlapped. There was no reason he couldn't go even if it was March. Jo Min-jun completed the application form briefly and sent it by email. If the tournament was only for Americans, he would see no hope, but fortunately it wasn't like that. Now the problem was the expenses. The plane ticket and the living expenses. If it was a month he could somehow withstand. But if by chance he passed to the finals? If you were picked as one of the 100 chefs, would living expenses be provided? Now that he thought about it, it made sense that you would be provided with living expenses when people from all over the country were gathered in one place. Of course, that was only if you got to the finals. You would have to take care of yourself in the preliminaries. As he saw a little bit of hope about the expenses, he rested at ease. Now I just have to say that I will be traveling. He was quite uncomfortable about lying, but thinking about it, it was not a lie. At least he would be traveling. Only that the purpose of the travel was a little different from what he was going to tell them. He felt bitter about it, but there was nothing he could do. Jo Min-jun looked sharply at the screen. Even if I'm not able to win, no. Let's win. I must win. He couldn't keep thinking that losing was unavoidable. Jo Min-jun's gaze grew sharper. Translator. Subak proofreader. Mailed. Chapter 5. In 92nd Street in New York, 1, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. In 92nd Street in New York, 1, Grand Chef Season 3 winner. Kaya Lotus. Jo Min-jun wrote down what he remembered on his notebook. The season that opened on 2010 was the third one. Although he didn't watch all the episodes, he did watch all the important parts. Like who was the winner, what abilities did she have? And in this season, she was also the chef Jo Min-jun respected the most. Maybe she was the most talented one on Grand Chef. Also she was the most popular winner. I think she deserved that. She was white, 18 years old, pretty looking, and British accent. And on top of that the trademark that she was from a poor family made her the perfect Cinderella. Just like what you would expect of someone from a poor family, her mouth was foul and she liked to curse, but there wasn't a single time when the judges didn't praise her dish. You wouldn't believe it if they told you that her dish was made without receiving any education. Even in Korea the name of Kaya Lotus rose to the top of search engines. Will I be able to beat her? I don't need any background. Grand Chef wasn't an audition that picked singers or actors. It was a chef's war where the food on the stage decided the winner. Cooking was everything that determined the winner. However, Kaya Lotus was like a bottomless pit. Honestly, it was to the point that he didn't even want her to participate on season 3. She was a monster that an amateur couldn't hope to beat. My weapons are knowledge and the system. Hers is talent. Jo Min-jun didn't know it all, but he remembered what kind of competition it was. There were some pieces of memory he couldn't remember, but he would be able to when the time came. Also in the case of tasting missions, for example, you had to guess the ingredients of the crepe and Jo Min-jun had confidence in guessing all of them without getting any mistakes. It was the strength of the system. Even if he was shown a dish and asked to make something identical, he could do it. Because he could know the recipe of the dish he tasted. Accurately speaking, he could only guess the dishes which tasting level was inferior to his cooking level. And now Jo Min-jun's levels were like this. Jo Min-jun, cooking level. 5 bakery level. 4 tasting level. 7 decoration level. For after reincarnating, the only thing that changed was that the tasting level went up by 1. It was the results of trying to feel the tastes one by one when he tried food. But certainly, after that, whenever he tried food he felt it funnier and felt a deeper taste. The flavor of an ingredient, he could feel it more precisely with the tip of his tongue, and also seemed to get a deeper understanding on the ingredients. I need to raise my cooking level. Jo Min-jun mumbled with a disappointed voice. The results of Jo Min-jun roaming around, the chefs of the restaurants that seemed okay to eat were on average from 4 to 5 points. That meant that Jo Min-jun's skills were just like that. Of course, for an amateur that was quite good, but it was insufficient. He wanted to win. He didn't want to be another ordinary chef, but someone that could make food better than anyone else. Also Grand Chef was the first stepping stone for that. He grew curious. What could be the level of Kaya Lotus? Airport. In front of security check. Lee Hai-seon let out a sigh. Ugh. saying that you are going to the United States. I'm sorry for going alone. Let's go together next time, Mom. Who's telling you something for going alone? No, I'm right for rebuking you. To go alone to that dangerous place, Lee Hai-seon seemed to look at the United States as a country of firearms, gangs and drugs. Saying the truth, it was partially right. Even if it was a developed country, there were a lot of crimes. That was the United States. Jo Min-jun said. Even so, New York is a city, so it won't be as dangerous. Do crimes in Korea only occur in the provinces? Jo Min-jun smiled at what his mom said and replied. But New York is protected by Spider-Man. Gosh. Lee Hai-seon laughed as if she was flabbergasted. Jo Min-jun hugged Lee Hai-seon for a moment. It was really just a moment. Jo Min-jun saw the soon shocked face of Lee Hai-seon and said. I'll be back. Call when you get there. Yes. After getting past the security check and the passport control, Jo Min-jun went to the gate of his plane. It was of course economy. His finances weren't abundant as to get on business class. Greetings, dear passengers. We give you our sincerest thanks for traveling with our Mokdong Airlines number 127. In the middle of the announcement, the plane was taking off to the skies. To arrive at New York you needed 24 hours. If you bought the ticket that went directly to New York it would be only 14 hours, but just to get 10 hours earlier to spend 300.0001 more, asterisk around $260, on a plane ticket, it was something he couldn't afford. Jo Min-jun's 10 hours weren't as valuable as those 300,000 won. At least, he thought like that. Grand Chef. I believe in only you. Don't let it be 10 hours wasted but 10 minutes worth 300,000 won. The time on the plane was really boring. There were times where they gave you in-flight food, but it was only 4 to 5 points food. It was already incredible that it got that score when the food was prepared beforehand and reheated with the oven. However, after completing his tasting training and putting good food on his mouth, the quality dropped considerably. And now, Jo Min-jun was tasting the fourth in-flight meal. Red jambalaya, freshness. 76% origin. There are too many ingredients to figure out, quality. High cooking points. 6/10. To say the truth, it was satisfactory. If something like this that was reheated on the oven, it made you wonder how good must it taste when fresh. It was a dish that would make many chefs to question that. Jambalaya was an only kind of dish that was eaten on the southern parts of the United States as fried rice. Also it was normally called red jambalaya when you put in some tomato sauce or slices of tomato to make the jambalaya have a red color. It was as soft as a risotto and had a deep flavor. The muddy feeling similar to fried rice was the perfect touch. Jo Min-jun closed his eyes and tried to feel the tastes of the jambalaya one by one. Of course, right now he was thinking up of the recipe of the jambalaya, but he was trying his best not to borrow the system's strength and figure it out just with his strength. The sausage on his mouth produced the Maillard reaction and a sweet aroma could be felt. Simply said, it was well roasted. Normal jambalaya's recipes started with frying meat in an oily pan. On top of that you fried onions, garlic, celery, etc. After that you boiled mushrooms, scallions, and different spices. The most important part here was the spices. Normally you use Tabasco sauce, but there was a whole world of differences on the jambalaya depending on what sauce you used or what herbs you put on. I honestly don't know about Tabasco. What herbs did they use? Is it saffron? It's a bit weak to be saffron. Maybe lime. Jo Min-jun checked the system's window. And smiled brightly. There was definitely some lime in it. Besides that, there was the sweet and sour flavor of the sauce. The recipe was also exactly as Jo Min-jun thought it to be. After boiling lime juice and Tabasco sauce, you cooked the seafood and after that put some rice and chicken gravy. And you just had to wait for the rice to be cooked and it was done. Joe Minjun could feel his heart beating and pressed the part that said Tabasco sauce. However, he couldn't help but sigh at the message he saw. As the tasting level is low, you are unable to view and analyze the recipe. Although the Jambalaya's recipe was already analyzed, you couldn't do it with the Tabasco sauce. Well, that meant that the Tabasco sauce was that good and was able to get a 6 on cooking points in an in-flight meal. He was disappointed but at the same time was curious about who was the owner of this recipe and felt some adoration for him. When he saw his surroundings, there seemed to be no one who tried jambalaya to dislike it. Certainly it was a dish that everyone liked. When he realized that simple truth, a corner of his heart seemed to fill with admiration. After finishing his last meal like that, he was on New York's LaGuardia Airport. February 26. New York's climate didn't seem that different to Seoul. When inhaled some air, the blood vessels on your nose constricted, and because of that Joe Minjun unconsciously started to breath from his mouth. Ah, it's rather cold. After getting on the bus setting out of the airport, a road with beautiful houses appeared after getting through a path of leafless trees. They were mostly houses made of red bricks. By the emotions you couldn't get on Korea, Joe Minjun let an awkward laugh. It was somewhat embarrassing. He didn't know what he was embarrassed of, but he was. Maybe he was proud of having achieved something. Joe Minjun got off the road. It was a place he didn't even know the name, but he decided to roam and find a place to stay. At that time Joe Minjun saw a poorly dressed man with an absent-minded expression. Joe Minjun approached the man and took out his wallet. And he gave him a $5 bill. He stared at Joe Minjun dazed. Maybe it was because of the unexpected approach. When Joe Minjun was about to say something, a kid came running to him at full speed. He bumped Joe Minjun and kept running. He fell sloppily on the floor on his butt and Joe Minjun frowned his brows and looked at the boy getting farther away. What was that? Why did they shove people and didn't even apologize? Maybe that was the character of New Yorkers. It was at that moment when he tried to complain. Joe Minjun's expression got rock hard. It wasn't there. That thing that was in his hands just some moments ago, disappeared as if it rose to the skies. My wallet. Translator. Subak proofreader. Mailed. Chapter 6. In 92nd Street in New York, 2, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. In 92nd Street in New York, 2, he tried to follow the pickpocketer with all of his strength, but there was no way to catch a local of the place. The pickpocket moved from alley to alley and soon disappeared from his sight. What the fuck? Joe Minjun looked around without any strength. It never happened before in Korea, but it wasn't even an hour and he became a victim of pickpocket. When I was warned to be careful of the pickpockets, would I be one of those victims? He thought like that. I was absent-minded. I didn't hold New York in much regard. He was at a loss for words. He didn't have much cash, but all of his cards were on the wallet. He couldn't even take a cab properly. Joe Minjun went back to the place he got robbed without strength. The beggar that was seated on the floor said with a smile, "Do you need this?" While he was saying that, on the beggar's fingers was the $5 bill Joe Minjun gave him. Joe Minjun let out a sigh and answered. It was quite a while since he interacted with a foreign man, but it was pretty fluent. It's okay. It's pettier to give and take. Get something to eat with that. Do I look like a beggar? It didn't look like he was asking because he was uncomfortable. He asked as if he was really curious. Joe Minjun scanned the blond man around his 40s. An old coat and a tattered scarf. To look at it as a vintage fashion. His clothes seemed too humble. He was seated on the floor and also, the hat was placed as if he was begging for money, so he seemed the more humbler. Are you not? I also have a house. At least you aren't homeless. The $5. Can you give it back? Didn't you just say so? That giving and then taking is the pettiest. As I got it being treated as a beggar, I'm taking those $5 as the cost of it. The man was saying that while having a big smile, so Jo Min-jun didn't particularly have anything to say to him. In the first place, there was nothing he could do with $5. Jo Min-jun sighed and sat beside the man. The man opened his mouth. I'm Lucas Dean. What's your name? Jo Min-jun. First name Jo and name is Min-jun. Korea. Japan. It's Korea. Lucas glanced at the traveling bag Jo Min-jun had and said. It looks like you came to sightsee, but you got it all ruined from the start. Can't do anything about it. Except to be on the streets. He couldn't call home saying that as soon as he got to the US he got pickpocketed. In fact, his mother was really worried before he left. Did it become roaming? Jo Min-jun took out his cell phone. He prepared it beforehand, but fortunately the internet worked just fine. After reporting the loss of his cards, he was wondering whether to call the police or not. Lucas told Jo Min-jun. The police won't even care about pickpockets. It's a minor matter. Even more if you are a foreigner. It's a scary place. Do you have somewhere to go? Jo Min-jun shook his head. Looking at Jo Min-jun, Lucas smiled and asked. Would you be willing to stay in a beggar's house? Lucas's house wasn't even 20 m away from where he was. He went inside the house made of red bricks and opened his mouth. For it to be a beggar's house, it is quite splendid. Stop with the beggar this and beggar that. It makes me sad listening to you. Thank you. Oh, please. Don't thank me like that. The house of the supposed beggar was quite good. The ceiling was high and the floor was made of marble. Was it a 230-yard house? If he combined the second floor's rooms, then it would be even bigger. It was at that moment when Lucas came in. On the living room, a golden-haired woman was looking at Lucas with a shocked expression. Lucas. Is that really you? Jane. I'm sorry. The woman's face, who was called Jane, was surprisingly pale. She was walking wobbly, so Jo Min-jun thought that she was going to fall. And in the end she didn't. Maybe if Lucas didn't quickly hold her, the hard marble floor would have. Jane. Ah, I can touch you. It really is you. I'm sorry for coming back late. Looking at the conversation going between the two, Jo Min-jun didn't know where to look and looked dejectedly. Only then did Jane seem to notice Jo Min-jun. It looked like she had many things to say, but she couldn't do so in front of a man she just met. And this person? Oh, he's someone who helped me. Greet him. He's called Min-jun. Oh, nice to meet you. I'm Jane Dean. I'm Jo Min-jun. Jo Min-jun shook hands slightly with Jane and looked at Lucas. Someone who helped him. What was with that? The only thing Jo Min-jun did for him was to give him $5. But looking at this house, he didn't seem like someone who needed those $5. He was curious but didn't feel like the right time to ask him that. Jane's eyes were moist, and Lucas's eyes were also red. There seemed to be something he didn't know about. Was Lucas a runaway? If he guessed at the age, it was something that couldn't possibly happen, but he couldn't help but think so looking at his clothes. Lucas opened his mouth. He lost his wallet because of me. It's going to be a while, but I want him to stay at our house. Is that going to be okay, Jane? Of course. It feels just like a dream that you have come back. Jesse will be happy too. At the name of Jesse, Lucas's face got dark. Will Jesse forgive me? Think about those things later. There are many things I want to ask you, but first let me ask you this. Lucas looked at Jane. Jane looked at Lucas with eyes that seemed to smile. Did you eat? While Jane was preparing to cooking, Jo Min-jun was being escorted to his room by Lucas. There was a room on the second floor. Jo Min-jun asked cautiously. Can I ask you what happened? I ran away. I wandered for quite a while, and returned just now. It's thanks to you. I didn't understand before and I still don't. What is it that I helped you with? Lucas showed him the $5 bill. Joe Minjun let an awkward laugh. You didn't even use the money. To receive goodwill from someone was like a trigger for me. I also looked around, felt guilty, and thought that I had to start again. Joe Minjun didn't argue at what he said. How many things would have passed his mind for the bill I gave him? So he couldn't guess wildly. There were many things he was curious with, but it was quite difficult to ask it all to Lucas right now. Joe Minjun chose to alleviate the mood. It's a $5 hotel. You can check out whenever you want. Lucas laughed while saying that. It was soon past 5 o'clock. Joe Minjun unpacked his luggage and went to the kitchen. It hadn't even been a while but the cooking was almost done. It was mac and cheese, hamburger steak, and salad. Joe Minjun, that at least wanted to help, said with an awkward face. The smell is really nice. It seems that your cooking skills are really good. My husband is quite the Epicurean. So to not hear his naggings, I can only practice. Jane said that and let out a light laugh. Lucas, who was next to her, said with a bitter expression. I believe that good food makes both the people who make it and the people who eat it happy. I still believe that. However, Lucas was about to say something but he refrained from doing so. Joe Minjun peeked to the direction where Jane was. The unique feeling and the aroma the mac and cheese gave thrusted to his nose. It was a smell that made him expect the cooking points. You will be happy. Good food makes you happy at least 3 times a day. It's twice. I only eat twice a day. Then you will have to make the effort to eat 3 times. Of course, if you thought about the calories American food had, maybe eating twice was healthier than otherwise. The mac and cheese was soon finished and being served on the table. Jane put the hamburger steak on the plate and asked while setting. Do you put eggs on the hamburger? No. I like it without eggs. Good. We also eat it without eggs in our house. Jane laughed and sat on her seat. Joe Minjun looked at the dishes with his eyes sparkling. Hamburger steak, freshness. 97% origin. Too many ingredients to figure out, quality. High, average ingredient, cooking point. June 10th, mac and cheese, freshness. 89% origin. Too many ingredients to figure out, quality. Medium high, average ingredient, cooking point. 6 out of 10. Not surprisingly, both of the dishes were 6 points. If it's 6 points, it is comparable to a restaurant. At least, what Joe Minjun experienced was like that. If even that wasn't it, it was like a weekly event dish from a really well-out-town restaurant. It was hard for normal people to get this result. Joe Minjun held his hands for a while and offered his prayer. Lucas said while looking at him. Are you Catholic? No. I'm Protestant. Too bad. We are Catholic. Dear. First eat your meal. Okay. Lucas grabbed his fork. Joe Minjun also grabbed his. Where Joe Minjun's hands first went to was the hamburger steak. To say the truth, he didn't really like hamburger steak. Precisely speaking, he didn't like minced meat dishes. However, the aroma this hamburger steak gave was really strong. It was when Joe Minjun took a bite of the hamburger steak. It seemed as if only beef was used, not pork, and the aroma was stronger than the average hamburger steak. He also sensed the aroma of pepper, and on the sauce he felt an acid taste. What is this sauce? Even when he put all of his concentration on the tongue, he couldn't think of anything. It wasn't a flavor he knew. Joe Minjun turned his head to the recipe window. He was curious about the sauce's identity. Hamburger steak ingredients: beef, onions, eggs, bread powder, salt, herbs, pepper powder, brown sauce, A1 sauce, Oh, so this is brown sauce. Brown sauce was developed on Britain. It was a sauce made with jujube, vinegar or sugar on tomato paste, but what made it sweeter was called HP sauce, and what made it sourer was the A1 sauce. It was a sauce that wasn't used much in Korea. Precisely speaking, the flavor of the hamburger steak wasn't so familiar. The flavor of the meat was strong, and the flavor was also strong. If it was on Korea, maybe it would be a failed dish. However, what appeared before him was a 6-point dish. If that was the case, it meant that it was a well-prepared dish. It could be that it was an American flavor that he was so strange to him. Jo Min-jun tried to approach cooking with the point of view of an American. Anyways, Grand Chef was a party of Americans. If he didn't understand American dishes, there was no way he could win. Jo Min-jun tried to comprehend the taste of the hamburger. He suppressed the strong aroma the hamburger gave and tried his best to comprehend the complicated flavor. At first he couldn't do it well. However, 1 bite. 2 bites. The more he ate, the more he comprehended. It was at that moment. Before Jo Min-jun appeared an alarm window. You ate a hamburger steak on your home. Location bonus. Your attitude on approaching your tasting made the proficiency of the skill, comprehension of American cooking, to rise. As your field of view on cooking broadens, your cooking level goes up. Translator. Subak proofreader. Mailed. Chapter 7. In 92nd Street in New York, 3, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. In 92nd Street in New York, 3, the first thing Jo Min-jun felt wasn't surprise or happiness. He was annoyed. He was concentrating on the food, and didn't want to get distracted by the alarm. Does it suit your tastes? At first it wasn't familiar. But as I ate, I was able to enjoy it more. It's the first dish I have eaten in the US. Then when someone mentions you the US, the first thing you will remember will be my cooking. It's an honor. Jane said that and laughed. Jo Min-jun, after smiling back at her, concentrated again on the food. What was used on the meat? It didn't look like something so ordinary as salt. On the ingredients window the herbs and the salt were separated, however he wondered if herb salt was used. The saltiness and the aroma of the herbs were so excessive they seemed to be mixed. When he felt that subtle difference, he didn't know why but felt joyful. He felt like his tongue was trained. You noticed that the salt and the herbs were mixed together and discovered the herb salt. Your delicacy experience increases. When the alarm window appeared, he could once again affirm it. You could sense the flavor more clearly after tasting it. The herb salt's unique flavor seemed to touch his heart. Jo Min-jun savored the hot meat juices in his mouth slowly. And at the same time he quickly read the recipe. It was more ordinary than he thought. You mixed fried onions, beaten eggs, bread powder and minced beef. The point that minced beef was used was different from the normally used hamburger steak from Korea. It wasn't chopped meat but minced meat, so while chewing you could feel the meat more shallowly, and at the same time the beef juices felt more abundant. Even the point that it didn't use pork meat was different. In Korea you mixed the chopped pork meat with beef on a 1:1 ratio. So the softness of pork meat had the tendency to sustain the strong flavor of the beef, but on this hamburger there was no pork. Maybe it was because of that he felt more unfamiliar. After that, the next steps on the recipe were quite ordinary. You fried the hamburger steak on an oiled pan, you put on some pepper on the brown sauce and put it on the hamburger. For a dish that didn't have any secret preparation to get 6 points, maybe it meant that it was an essentially basic dish. After eating half of the hamburger steak, Jo Min-jun moved his fork to the mac and cheese. He didn't know what would be the final flavor if he ate 2 dishes that were strongly seasoned, so he purposefully ate the least seasoned hamburger steak first. Honestly speaking, mac and cheese wasn't a dish Jo Min-jun liked. He didn't like strongly seasoned dishes, precisely speaking he didn't like dishes that made him feel pressured. He preferred simple flavors instead of complicated ones, and a simple sauce or only salt instead of sauce mixed with various ingredients. Because of that, Joe Minjun felt that the mac and cheese that on top of that was added salt to be too strong. Wasn't it on the level that you couldn't finish melting cheese, so you had to boil it down? And on top of that it was added milk, so sincerely it wasn't an easy dish. Precisely speaking, mac and cheese was called macaroni and cheese. To explain it simply, you cooked butter, cheese and milk with macaroni until it boiled down. It was like an American tteokbokki, Korean spicy soft rice cake. Only that instead of the spiciness it was greasy. However, when he opened his mouth to eat a bite, it didn't feel as greasy. The flavor was also different from the one he tasted in Korea. It was slightly spicy and also a refreshing aroma could be felt. Joe Minjun with a hint of admiration opened his mouth. This mac and cheese is really delicious. It's the best from those I have tried. It's one of Jane's own dish. Our daughter really loves it. Lucas said and put on a smile. The recipe alarm popped up, but Joe Minjun kept to analyzing the flavors on his head. But he couldn't help but frown at the aroma of pepper. Because there wasn't even a single black powder in it. Is there maybe white pepper on it? Yes. You are right. Your sense of taste is really sharp. Normally, people don't even notice. Of course. If you could taste pepper but see none, then that meant that it contained white pepper. White pepper was made by steaming the black skin of the pepper and grating the white stones. Its aroma was weaker than normal pepper, but it was commonly used cooking white-colored dishes. Joe Minjun laughed and said as if he had won a quiz contest. Because I'm planning to become a chef. Oh. So did you come here to try some dishes? That's one of my purpose, but I want to participate in a competition. Grand Chef. I know that. I have seen it quite a few times on TV. The conversation stopped for a while. Joe Minjun put some mac and cheese in his mouth and started to relish the flavor. He didn't feel rejection towards the aroma of cheese that flowed through the tip of his tongue and the top of the inside of his mouth. The spicy taste seemed to be mustard. The herbs aroma that came along with the cheese was quite familiar. Parsley. However, he was quite confused with the sour flavor, and it wasn't even vinegar. At the end, Joe Minjun admitted defeat. Joe Minjun opened the recipe window before him and enlarged the ingredients section. Mac and cheese ingredients: macaroni, cheddar, cheese, butter, flour, milk, Worcestershire sauce, Dijon mustard, parsley, white pepper. Worcestershire sauce. For Koreans it was better known as Uster sauce. Only then did Joe Minjun get to know of the identity of the sauce. This sauce was made by boiling onions, carrots, celery, etc. Had a sour and salty flavor. And for Korean people, it had a really exotic aroma, but it seemed that he couldn't feel it because it was hidden under the mac and cheese's aroma. He didn't know if the recipe was an ordinary one. Because it was something he didn't normally make. Even if he were to make it, he wouldn't use the main recipe but would guess and put some milk, cheese, and would watch tutorials. The roux made by frying butter and flour was an ingredient that if put moderately on the mac and cheese it would make the cheese stretchy. The recipe was simple. After boiling the macaroni, you mixed milk with the roux and made it long, and on top of that you put Worcester sauce, Dijon mustard, and spices. The next step was to put cheese, and after that was the turn of the macaroni. At first glance it would seem complicated, but in reality it wasn't that hard to make. Did you make the Worcester sauce personally? Yes. The commercial one was a bit lacking in flavor. I couldn't even think that I would be able to feel a deep flavor like this one on a mac and cheese. Originally it was when Joe Minjun tried to continue what he was saying. He heard someone closing the door of the entrance. At that moment Lucas's face became stiff as if he were nervous. Joe Minjun looked at the entrance. A golden-haired student was coming into the house. She seemed to be a middle or high school student, but it was difficult to know beyond that. Because it was difficult to determine a white person's age by sight. Her round blue eyes were opened really big and were staring at Lucas. What is this? Jesse. Wait, let's talk with Mom. I'm asking you. What is that person doing here? Jesse's eyes were twitching. Jo Min-jun was drawn in another's family fight, so he could only be seated nervously. He felt that his stomach was going to get upset. Jesse. Sit down first. Have your meal, I don't want it. I'm not eating. What are you doing in front of a guest? It can't be done. Jesse. Go upstairs to your room. Jane yelled sternly. Jesse glared at Lucas disappointedly. Lucas could just look at Jesse with regret. Jesse bit her lips. I'm always the bad one. With that, the discussion ended. Jesse went upstairs stomping. A banging sound of the door could be heard and at the same time it became quiet on the kitchen. Lucas said with a sigh. I'm sorry. I got you involved in vain. It's okay. You don't have to apologize. Jo Min-jun said that and waved his hands. Jane went upstairs saying that she will have a conversation with Jesse, and only Lucas and Jo Min-jun remained in the kitchen. Jo Min-jun let a silent sigh. Mac and cheese. It's not an atmosphere in which I can eat more. But it's delicious. Really delicious. In 92nd Street in New York, 3, N translator. Subak proofreader. Mailed. Chapter 8. In 92nd Street in New York, 4, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. In 92nd Street in New York, 4, on that night after dinner, Lucas told his story bitterly to Jo Min-jun. It was really honest to tell to someone he had just met, but maybe it was easier to do so as they were only related for a day. Lucas said he was the CEO of a jelly factory. When you heard the word factory it was easy to imagine a low-quality food, however Lucas was someone who tried his best to get away of that prejudice. And his efforts returned as a rather good sale. The downfall of a factory that was doing well happened on a morning. An American program that seeks safety targeted Lucas's factory. They went to the broadcast with a jelly that contained soil, something that could never happen in a refining process, and claimed that it was a jelly from Lucas's factory. Also that made-up broadcast got popular as it got more than 10% of rating. Lucas immediately sued the broadcast, however, as the trial took really long the factory was already in a state of downfall. It was Lucas's dream to manage a jelly factory since he was small. However they say that since then he has lost all of his will. That's why he became a vagabond and roamed from here to there. He spent almost 3 months as a vagabond. After those 3 months he came back to the 92nd Street, but Lucas didn't have the courage to get inside his house. At that time, it was Jo Min-jun who gave him those $5. When Jo Min-jun was holding the $5 bill, there were many things Lucas was thinking in his head. The embarrassment of his shabby form to the point people treated him as a beggar, and a strange feeling he got when he was given the $5. It was a complicated feeling, but thanks to that Lucas could return to his house. However, Jesse won't forgive me. Lucas mumbled bitterly. Jane went upstairs to soothe Jesse, the results were the noises of Jesse crying and Jane's pissed voice. Lucas sighed and said, I'm sorry. To bring a guest to this mess. A small child will be like that. When you stop feeling sorry, you will be able to go back to before. I wonder. Would I be able to do that? I left everything behind and left. I had a kid and a wife. I could only think of my sufferings. I'm a bad father. No father in the world can be a perfect Superman. Listening to that, Lucas replied while smiling. But all the children wish their father was Superman. Jo Min-jun couldn't reply back. Lucas's mood was really down to try to console him. The conversation ended there. Lucas walked sloppily to his bedroom, and Jo Min-jun went to his assigned room. His head was a mess. Lucas's problem was also his problem, and this house's problem. Of course it wasn't a problem he could intervene in because he thought that it was a sensitive family problem. The problem was the schedule he had after. First, he had to go downtown. He had to get reissuance of his lost card, and needed a proper place to stay that wasn't Lucas's house. Should I ask if they can get me there? There wasn't anything harder than to say something he would regret. It was even more in a situation like this family. It was when Jo Min-jun was sighing and was covering himself with the blanket. It could be heard that the next room's door was opening with a creak. The next room was Jessie's room. Where could she be going at this night? Maybe she is running away. At the moment's worry, Jo Min-jun opened the door quietly and went out. Jessie was walking sneakily almost to the point that nothing could be heard. And the steps those feet were directed to was the kitchen. Looking at Jessie eating the cold mac and cheese, Jo Min-jun let a sigh inwardly. Right. She's at the age she should be hungry. If she didn't eat dinner, then even more so. Jo Min-jun hesitated a moment and went downstairs. Jessie was startled and stared at Jo Min-jun. Jo Min-jun laughed awkwardly and her eyes were filled with wariness. Hello. What is it? Are you hungry? Should I make you something? Oh, it's not my kitchen. He couldn't just use another person's kitchen. However Jessie could, so Jo Min-jun said. After pouring some water, put some vinegar and boil it again. Then it will be edible. Jessie didn't reply but she did as Jo Min-jun told her to. She poured water and vinegar in a pot and put it on fire. The vinegar would save the macaroni's elasticity at least a little. Of course there was some sour flavor left, so it was best to pour just a little. After sloppily resuscitating the macaronis, Jessie started to eat her late meal without any words. Jo Min-jun just stared at Jessie. In the end Jessie opened her mouth first. Why are you looking like that? Your father. I heard the story. I'm just trying to leave it like that, so stop it. Jessie replied with a mean voice. It was a rebellious attitude but he didn't mind. Still, his body was one which had lived as a teacher 2 years ago. He was rather accustomed to dealing with an adolescent going through puberty. He shook his head. I'm not thinking of lecturing you. Just to congratulate you. Congratulate on what? That your father came back. Don't you think it's a reason to celebrate? Jessie didn't reply. Her long eyelashes, characteristical of white people, pointed down. He could tell with that. That she didn't hold a grudge against her father, unlike what she was showing. Rather she was quite longing for him. I'm leaving soon. What does that mean? That you can tell me everything without being embarrassed. That your father came back, honestly you are happy. You have to be happy. If you want to eat something but can't you keep remembering it? It's the same. Do then. What? What should I do then? Her words were mixed with crying sounds. Jessie was biting her lips. It seemed like she didn't want to show her weak side. Jessie continued talking while crying. Whenever I see Dad I get angry. In the past, he was proud and cool. Why did that kind of person? Why did he get so small? Why did he get that miserable? It's not that he got small. Your father aged to the point you can see his small back. How many fathers with broad backs were on the world? Every father is afraid of his back not being big enough in front of his children, but it couldn't be helped for that day to come. Except he got healthy enough for his age, the children will end up knowing that their father's back is small. Jo Min-jun opened his mouth. I said that I won't lecture you, so instead I will ask you a question. Do you want to hug the small back of your dad or do you want to stop looking at it? It's not that I don't want to look at it. So it means that you want to hug him. Jo Min-jun smiled after saying that. Jessie turned her head with her eyes flushed. It was a good idea. At least, she was a kid that didn't know how to hate her parents. It was precisely that she was that kind of kid, that after all that revolt she ended in her room, which was in the second floor. If she was a kid that wasn't fond of her parents, then she would have immediately ran away from her house. Jo Min-jun, undisturbed, opened his mouth. I will cheer for you, do you want to do it? So how? Jo Min-jun replied. With the things your dad loves the most. For example, jelly. Translator. Subak proofreader. Mailed. Chapter 9. In 92nd Street in New York, 5, you are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. In 92nd Street in New York, 5, jelly. Jessie asked once more. It wasn't because she didn't know what jelly was, but because it was an idea that has never crossed her mind. Jessie, of course, knew that Lucas liked jelly. But I wasn't that her father had raised a factory just for that reason. However, she never thought of making some jelly and giving it to him as a present. She thought that it was just like making some pizza and gifting it to the pizza store owner. However, now that she thought about it, the situation was different compared to this circumstance. The jelly factory disappeared and the jelly that Lucas liked so much wasn't near him anymore. If she were to make some jelly to the current Lucas. Jessie lifted her head and looked at Jo Min-jun while thinking like that. The deep blue eyes with double eyelids were staring at Jo Min-jun. For those eyes, Jo Min-jun was like a weird person. For a person she had just met, to request her to make some jelly for her father. That kind of weird person. But she seemed to trust him. Although she didn't know why. Maybe that weirdness made him more trustable. Jessie opened her mouth. But I don't know how to make it. It's okay. I do. Saying the truth, he didn't know too well as to say it that confidently. However, Jo Min-jun thought that making the jelly was more important and the flavor was only secondary. Just the fact that Jessie made the jelly was enough of a meaning. Jo Min-jun, while thinking like that, realized something. Even if it was the same dish, the food on the dish could become a completely different thing depending on who cooked it. What kind of mind should I keep while cooking? Suddenly that question popped in his head, but it was not the right moment to be speculating. Jo Min-jun opened his mouth. This house's kitchen was Jane's area, but for now Jane should understand him. Granted that Jane didn't understand him and cursed him because of that, it was a completely different matter. Whatever the result was, the most important thing was to fix the relationship of parent-child. It was that thinking. For now, can you bring some fruit? If you don't have any, some juice is also okay. I think there's some apple. But it shouldn't be ripe. Then it's better. When making jelly, the less ripe a fruit, the more delicious it becomes. Oh, Jessie nodded and brought the apples. And she also brought some sugar. She didn't have gelatin, but it didn't matter. Jo Min-jun knew of a way to replace it. Didn't you make jelly when you were young? I did. But instead of making it, I liked to eat it more. It's okay. If you make something you like to eat, it is meant to become more delicious. Jo Min-jun said that and smiled brightly. Jessie glanced at Jo Min-jun and asked. Mister, are you a chef? No. I aspire to become 1 inch, are you sure you make it well? Why? Are you worried that it's not tasty? Jessie didn't reply and kept her mouth shut. Jo Min-jun handed over the knife while looking at Jessie. Looking at the puzzled Jessie, Jo Min-jun opened his mouth. Divide the apple in 4 and carve the seed. After that, split it in 4 and don't peel it off. Why the skin? Because there's pectin on the skin. That will do instead of the gelatin. Inside the skin, and the pulp below that were the most important pectin ingredient for making jelly. You can do it right. This much is easy. Jessie talked as if telling him to refrain, disregarding her, and lifted the knife. However, her handling of the knife was quite sloppy. While holding the apple with a hand, and the other for holding the apple, when she tried to slice it, the knife got stuck after it went all the way to the middle. Even so, Jessie didn't try to press the back of the knife with her other hand. Jo Min-jun opened his mouth. You should press the back of the knife with your hand. Yes. Like that. Even after Jessie finished with slicing the apples, Jo Min-jun didn't make a move. After all, there was no meaning if Jo Min-jun made it. Jessie had to make it by herself. For her father. And because of herself. Now put it on the kettle and pour some water until the top of the apples get slightly out of the water. And put the fire on low. Are you really going to make me do it all? Do you want me to help you? Fine. I'll do it. I will. Jessie poured the water accordingly. To say the truth, this was the part where most of the beginners made mistakes. In reality, even Jo Min-jun made them. After pouring a lot of water, the next thing he planned to do was to boil it down until the moisture evaporated. However, when put lots of water, the fruits turned bad. So depending on how she regulated the water decided if the jelly was a success or a failure. Jo Min-jun just stared still at the kettle that subtly started to boil. Now what do I do? After waiting for a while more, when you think the apples are turning soft, start to squash them. But first let's prepare all the other processes. Can you bring me a cotton cloth and a bowl? Okay. Jessie, as if she gave up, obeyed. After leaving the cotton cloth and the bowl by a side of the table, Jessie and Jo Min-jun stared at the kettle in silence. The first one to speak was Jo Min-jun. High school. No. I become a high schooler the next year. And Mr. It's not Mr. but Min-jun. I'm a college student. After thinking about it, we didn't even present ourselves properly. Jessie Dean. Where does Mr. come from? Japan. Where do you think I come from? China, if not Korea. Japanese people aren't as calm-minded as Mr. Jo Min-jun nodded while grasping an image of Japanese children. Jo Min-jun opened his mouth. I'm Korean. And I'm traveling. I don't know why people like New York so much. It's a city that doesn't have many things to see. It's like you don't know the value of something you usually have by your side. It wasn't something he said with only New York in mind. Jessie also understood the meaning under Jo Min-jun's words. She spoke with a calmer voice. I want you to know that it's not that I'm forgiving Dad. There's no need to. But can't you try to understand? All the dreams he pursued for crumbled in an instant. On that situation, not every father can become a Superman. Jessie nodded at what Jo Min-jun said and shut her mouth. After a while of not opening her mouth, she barely opened it and spoke. Even so, every daughter wished their father to be a Superman. She was right. Jo Min-jun lifted the spoon he had by his side and covered her eyes. And while making round motions he said. Even Supermen have times they want to hide. If you saw Spider-Man you would understand. Jessie laughed and looked bitterly at the floor. Jo Min-jun opened his mouth. Enough of this Superman talk, now slowly stir the insides of the kettle. The apple should be soft. As for the pulps, squash it with the ladle. Okay. Compared to the first time, her voice was softer. Jessie, after taking off the lid of the kettle, started to stir with the ladle. The bubbling sounds and the sweet aroma that could be felt, the unique fresh aroma was similar to paste. When the pulp was almost done squashing, Jo Min-jun covered the bowl with the wet cotton cloth. And said. Pour the things inside the kettle on the bowl, slowly. Jessie tilted the kettle. From the kettle's bird flowed the squashed pulps and the fruit juices. Those things started to gather on top of the cotton cloth. It was then. Jessie grabbed the cotton cloth and tried to squeeze it. Jo Min-jun hurriedly raised his voice. No, yes. Why? If you do that then the pulp gets through the cotton cloth and the mixture loses oxygen. Just let the pulp to flow like this. It's going to take a while. You need patience to cook jelly. In the end Jessie let out a sigh and had to wait for the pulp to naturally flow out of the cotton cloth. After that, everything ran smoothly. After showering the pulp with sugar on a 4.3 ratio and mixing it, you stirred it while boiling. You had to boil roughly until the jelly slipped off the spoon. Then you had to cool it down after putting it in a vessel. After finishing all of those processes it was roughly past 1 a.m. Jessie stretched while having sleepy eyes. Jo Min-jun smiled and said, How is it to cook for someone else? I don't know. It feels as if I just achieved something. And unexpectedly relieves the stress. Congratulations on giving your first step. What kind of step was it? Understanding your father? Or starting to cook? She was curious but she couldn't ask. If she asked something like that then she would be treated like a kid that didn't even know about hidden meanings. And somehow Jessie didn't want to be treated like a kid. The morning was bright. The sunlight that leaked through the iron fences melted the snow piled on it. Lucas opened his eyes slowly. The first thing he saw was his wife's nape. He felt a warm feeling looking at that familiar yet unfamiliar sight. However, at the same time when he remembered the angry look Jessie gave him, the smile on Lucas's face immediately disappeared. He couldn't help but let out a sigh. He didn't know how to ease the anger of his daughter. He couldn't think of any answers. Lucas left his bedroom without strength. He wanted to regain some strength with drinking a glass of water, but he saw something strange when he opened the fridge. Next to the water bottle was a big paper bowl. The thing that was wrapped with wrapping paper was definitely jelly. And handmade jelly on top of that. It's apple jelly. Jessie. Jessie looked at Lucas with her swollen eyes. Could it be that her daughter really made jelly because of him? Lucas was getting confused thinking about that, so Jessie said bluntly. First eat it. It was hard making it at dawn. Right. Lucas ate some jelly after swelling his eyes a little. It was a bit lacking, but for it to be homemade was definitely good jelly. And in the first place, quality wasn't even that important. He couldn't even feel the flavor of the jelly properly. Delicious. It's delicious. Fine then. It was that moment when Jessie tried to give her back. Lucas hugged her. Jessie didn't push Lucas back. Lucas was fighting back his tears and opened his mouth, but no sound could be heard from his mouth. It only had a sobbing feeling. Jessie too, rolled her teary eyes but she pretended to be calm. Jo Min-jun, while looking at that sight, turned his back. He wanted to keep that moment for the two of them. However, what he encountered was Jane's teary eyes. Jo Min-jun said with an awkward face. I'm sorry. I used your kitchen without permission. It's okay. Thank you for helping my child on making the most delicious dish in this kitchen. Jo Min-jun turned his back with a smile on what Jane had just said. In his eyes appeared the cooking score of the jelly. However, Jo Min-jun didn't look at that score. He had no need to. Because that jelly didn't have the need to be judged with points. Jo Min-jun replied back unperturbed. It's one of the greatest dishes I have seen in my life. In 92nd Street in New York, 5, N. Translator. Subak Proofreader. Mailed.